God! Ah! Wow! Hello everybody, my name is Zack Klapman. I'm moonlighting from the Smoking Tire for a very, very good reason, because today we are here in Miami at the Concours Club, a country club racetrack, because Curated is allowing me to drive a Ferrari 355. And I have wanted to drive one of these for a very, very, very long time. But this is not a normal 355, nor is it a normal 355 challenge, even though it kind of looks like one. So today I'm going to tell you everything that's going on with this car, and then you can go bid on it on Cars and Bids. In 1995, Ferrari unveiled their new mid-engine V8 powered sports car, the 355. To understand that, you need to understand who was running Ferrari at the time. His name was Luca di Montezemolo. This man's career is incredible. In the early 70s, he gets hired to be Enzo Ferrari's assistant. The next year, he is assigned to manage Scuderia, Ferrari's Formula One team. The year after that, they won the Drivers' Championship, and they repeated it again in 1977. Both championships thanks to Niki Lauda. Let's jump ahead to 1991. Enzo Ferrari has passed away, he's been dead for a few years, and Ferrari is struggling. So Luca gets promoted to become the president. He drives the Ferrari 348, the predecessor to this car, and he says, why is this car so bad? Because the 348 was known for being hard to drive in traffic, heating problems, handling was kind of weird. It was just not a great car. Fix this, is what he said. This is why the 1994 348, the last year they made, actually drove really good, because underneath it was the development bones that became the 355. While the 355 shared a steel monocoque and a rear tubular subframe with the 348, it had new suspension geometry. They had new welds, so it was 30% stiffer. It was easier to drive in traffic. It was a better car overall. And while the engine was kind of carried over, it was punched out from 3.4 liters to 3.5 and then given 5 valves instead of 4, increasing horsepower. That's where the name comes from, 355. Part of the reason that Luca said the 348 was so bad was that the Acura NSX had just come out and was so good at everything. All right, so you're probably wondering, why does this car have yellow stickers, a roof scoop, and a giant wing on it? Well, beginning with the 348, Ferrari made a single mark racing series, Ferrari Challenge, and they would support people that wanted to turn a road car into a race car. They did this with 355s. About 108 were made of them. You'd order them from the dealership, and the factory would install some parts, the dealership would install some other parts, and boom, you have a now non-street legal Ferrari that you can go racing. It was like Spec Miata for people who traded in oil futures or invented Botox. But this is not an official Ferrari F355 challenge. It actually has a much more interesting story. This car was purchased in 1995 in New York. And just 1 year later, it was stolen. It was discovered missing the hood, the doors, the interior, the wheels, and the tires. What was left was purchased by a racing shop who said, well, let's turn one man's trashed Ferrari into another man's golden race car. Now, because this was not an official F355 challenge car, they couldn't race it in that series. So they built it so that it could race in the new Speed Vision Challenge series. I know the names are kind of confusing. Speed Vision was a TV channel. TV channels were a thing we used to watch before streaming existed, and Speed Vision had bought a racing series that they would show on this television. Now here's where things get crazy, because it is estimated that $300,000 of 1990s money was invested in this car to make it into what you see today. A fully built, psychotic race car. In the front, it doesn't look that different from a 355 Challenge, because those cars also had to have permanently mounted tow hooks, in case someone has a oopsie. But that never happened in any Ferrari Challenge series. If you search for it on YouTube, Ferrari Challenge series crash, you'll find 0 videos. You do have this incredibly aggressive carbon front splitter. And there's also carbon fiber doors. This stuff was made in the late 90s. It's an option on cars that cost $28,000 today. But back then, that was not the case. You also might notice the fuel filler cap mounted in the center of the hood for refueling during big races, of course. And then that incredible large roof scoop. And that's not for keeping the cabin cool. That sends air directly into the airbox, giving the engine even more power. One of the things that Ferrari would give you if you ordered an F355 Challenge, an official car, were better brakes. They're actually Brembos that came from the F40. It's quite a hand-me-down. And then the wheels are small, light, and hollow, like a bird's bones. They're magnesium, so that it has the least amount of rotating mass possible. The GTB came with electronically adjustable shock absorbers. Pretty rad for the mid-90s. Very common today, of course. The race cars came with a stiffer fixed spring, but this thing has Penske three-way shocks. This whole car was built to chase other cars. That's what's so cool about it is, the Ferrari Challenge Series is rad, but you're racing other Ferraris of the exact same make. So it's a spec series, that's rad. But this was going up against Porsches, Corvettes, Aston Martins, all kinds of other cars. So it had to be competitive. From the front, this looks like a race car, but you see cars on the street driving around with tow hooks mounted for style with like a little gymnast ring hanging from it or a Hello Kitty dongle, sure, whatever. You get back here and you realize, no, this car is serious. This is an actual race car. The transponder is a giveaway. The transponder is how a racetrack keeps track of all the lap times of all the cars. Every time they go past a certain point on the track, a signal is sent to a computer and it tells you that the car ran a 1 minute or a 59.5 or a 102 or whatever. Two of the other giveaways are the giant rear diffuser. These look like speakers that you would see on a US Army base from World War II. There's a carbon fiber diff cover under there, and the diff says Ferrari on it. So just in case you needed a reminder and you happen to be laying on the ground. The exhaust system is insane. I mean, it's a super trap pipe, but it's an 8-to-1 system. And it actually fixes one of the most notorious problems that the 355 had, which were cracking exhaust manifolds, which is an expensive thing to fix. I was gonna put my hand in the exhaust tip to show you what it looks like, but I don't want that image getting screen grabbed on the internet. So just use your eyes. It's big. Speaking of big, this wing is enormous. It's carbon fiber, it's adjustable, and obviously it helps with downforce at speed. This keeps the back of the car planted to the ground as it goes around high-speed corners. Something you won't see very often is a carbon fiber engine cover like this one. This is very, very cool. First of all, you can see that the roof scoop feeds right into here. This is the air box for the engine. It's where the air goes into the intake plenum and then goes into the cylinders, where it then helps gasoline light on fire. Here we come to the heartbeat, the orchestra, one of the main reasons why I love small engine Ferraris so much, because they sound so good. 3.5 liter V8 engine. The regular 355 and Challenge had the same engine, 375 horsepower, the dry sump engine. The Challenge cars had a little bit more cooling added. This is not that. This is a 14-to-1 built motor that has about 433 horsepower, dyno tested. It's got a new racing clutch bearing. The head gaskets have recently been replaced. And if you look in here, you can tell that this is not factory stuff. There's way too many cool anodized fittings for this to be from a factory. Now this car has what's called a trans axle. A lot of cars have them, especially mid-engine cars. That means that the transmission and the axle are one unit and they are mounted behind the engine. By moving the engine to the middle of the car, you help with the car's balance. It also helps with the acceleration compared to a front engine car. As I said before, this does not have the normal suspension that a Challenge car came with. This has Penske three-way adjustable shocks. And right here, you actually have the remote reservoirs and the adjustment knobs for that suspension. The remote reservoir system also allows the shock fluid to stay a little bit cooler than if it was all housed in the shock itself. Now, as you can see by looking around, this is full race car. This is all business, no fun. Racing is not the safest activity in the world, but it has gotten a lot safer because of rules, regulations, and the inventions of a lot of different gear. So to turn this into a race car that could enter the Speed Vision Challenge series, they had to install a bunch of stuff. Roll cage, of course. Just like the Challenge cars from Ferrari, you had to have a roll cage. You need racing harnesses because they will hold you in much better than a 3-point seatbelt. You also need a fire suppression system. That's that tank down there. If the car catches itself on fire, something goes wrong, you hit a button and it dumps fire retardant over a lot of parts of the car and hopefully extinguishes any fire that has started or stops it from growing any larger. And then there's also an engine cutoff switch, and you just turn it, like this one. You turn that and it cuts off all electricity going to the engine and basically turns the engine off. The ECU, it looks like an electronics store just was dumped back there. You can see the relays, the wires, anything you might need to change is quickly accessible. Drilled racing pedals, aluminum saves weight. There's no fancy dashboard, there's no carpeting, no sound deadening, none of that stuff. This is all exposed metal. Again, saves weight, and the fewer soft things, the less there is that could possibly catch on fire. You've got a system for monitoring your lap times, and then of course the Motec readout here. This will give you all of your crucial engine information like RPMs, gear, etc. It's as legible as possible. You've got a shift light at the top. That will tell you when red line's happening. The center console looks like it was stolen from a Cessna that I built myself and then didn't pass FAA regulations. You can control your fans, you have a main on switch, and then you have a starter button, and that's all you need. There's no climate control, there's no stereo, there's no nothing. It's just the essentials. Whatever you need to be allowed on track is there, and there's nothing else. Something you might notice is that the ergonomics in this car are bad. And that's something Ferrari didn't really figure out until the 430 or 458. So we have a steering wheel that can adjust up and down, but look how far away it is. The rule with track driving is if you can reach out and put your wrist on the top of the wheel with a bend in your elbow, that's optimal. This is not. It also wiggles a little bit. But my feet are fine. My legs fit. I'm pretty much the right size for this thing. If I wore a helmet, it would probably be rubbing on this roof. And if you're 6 feet tall, this probably isn't the car for you. Although, I can't tell. It's possible you could mount the seat lower, but the passenger seat looks like it's mounted to the chassis, or to the unibody rather. So I don't think there's a way you could lower that seat at all. A funny thing about the 355s is that the driver's seat is actually aligned more close to the center of the car than the passenger seat. So I'm pretty inset from where a window would be. Well, that's not good. This wheel needs to telescope because if my fingers go in here, they're getting cut off. Double apex. Oh! Wow. Brake pedal stiff. Downshifting. Heel toe is easy. Letting the clutch out, you just do it. Gated shifter sounds and feels incredible. That is so loud, and it revs so fast. You can't hear any of this, I know. Yeah, you spend all the money on the sound. I get it. Well, wow. Redline 8,000. I'm shifting at 75. I don't want to buy a Ferrari today. Even though it has a fuel cutoff. God, it's so hard to steer though. Can't get the wheel. I don't know what else to say. I don't know what else to say. Jesus Christ. I think I'm gonna cry. God, that's enough. Religious experience? I've never said that before. The sound is even better than I imagined it would be, and I've heard these drive around all the time, but it is truly one of the greatest sounds I've ever heard in my life. You couldn't hear anything but the engine, so you probably heard it. Hopefully the audio captured it. Ergonomics are so challenging. This wheel needs to be brought back like 8 inches, because if I needed to catch any kind of oversteer, anything, like I can't fit my finger between the steering wheel and the dashboard. Brakes, manual, not assisted. You'd get used to it quickly. A lot of track cars have manual brakes because you can be more precise with your feel and your braking pressure. Because, you know, a lot of some race cars didn't have ABS, but a lot of times the difference between perfect threshold braking and locking the brakes up or braking too gently is like a millimeter. I mean, the pressure is almost unquantifiable, but your foot just knows. So that's why they're manual brakes. They're just stiff and tough to get used to. Felt like it had a lot of grip. I didn't explore the limits, obviously. This track is sort of like out and back, so it's a lot of tight, like second gear corners, not a lot of sweeper things. And between the steering alone just made me feel reserved. I wanted to be careful. Here's what I'll say about this thing. The argument for buying this is a confusing one. And honestly, the argument for buying a 355 Challenge, a regular one, is tough because you can't drive it on the road, right? So it's a track-only car. And it was only allowed to race in a specific series, and that series doesn't exist anymore. The engines are known for having some fragile things that you'd have to fix, of course. This is good because if it's gonna be a track car anyway, why not go all the way? You know, you're not in a spec series anymore, so have an engine that has 433 horsepower. And by the way, power doesn't really kick in until 7,100 RPM, and then it rips. So you have an engine that's fully built and hopefully more reliable than the regular 355 engine. The negatives of this car, though, are it's even more rare. So finding a shop that can work on this could be more challenging than finding one that can work on a regular 355. You could take a 355 Challenge to a Ferrari dealership and they'll be able to work on it because they know what the engine is. But this, it's more of a science experiment. You have to have a motorsports shop or the shop that built the engine work on it because they're going to be the ones that understand it. The rest of the car is car. Wires, Motec stuff, not as complicated. It's fairly simple, and there's not a lot of fancy electronics like you might have with a modern track car with fancy traction control systems. You could go out and you could buy a spec Miata or a spec E46 or a Radical, a Caterham. There's a number of track-specific options for a person with this budget. But for me, what I fell in love with in regard to cars is shape, sound, and feedback. The shifter is without parallel. It feels good. This is a rod-actuated shifter. One of the changes they made from the 348, that was cable actuated. So some of that direct sensation is because you are moving metal rods. The shifter click, exposed gate, I mean, it's in my brain from childhood. Seeing Ferraris with exposed gated shifters, I think they're the coolest thing in the world. But they don't just look cool, they feel good. And the car sounds good. And unless you're in a racing series, any track special is special. You can learn from any of them. So I think with a few ergonomic tweaks, if you're the right size and you like Ferraris or you just like music, this is a pretty exciting option. So if you like this car and what it could be, you can bid on it on Cars and Bids. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Curated for making a dream come true. I've always wanted to drive a 355. And shout out to Concours Club for hosting us here and letting me drive this thing on their track, because driving this on the street would not have done it any justice, especially the Miami streets, which are basically a grid. So thank you guys for watching.